Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're doing something different here today. I'm joined by Lucas Vos and Emilee Verduin. I learned how to say your name correctly from Lucas. Thank you very much. Um, this is an interesting group we have together. So I had a chat with Lucas on Lucas's podcast, which is a lovely podcast. I've been YouTube's been suggesting it to me, and I'm like, you're right. And I'm clicking on it and I'm watching it and I'm watching them all the way through. And yeah, it's right exactly in the lane that works for me, which I found to be really interesting. Like the three of us have stumbled onto the same set of topics and interest, it seems, from like really different perspectives and points of view. Maybe not super different, but different ones. So first off, I'd love to just have you guys introduce yourself a little bit. Um, say where you come from and sort of what ideas and experiences and types of art and things like that are interesting to you. Lucas, you can
I'll
go
start.
first. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Jake. Thank you for the compliment as well. I'm happy to know that you're listening. And for those who want to see the conversation with me and Jake, I really enjoyed that. So, yeah, my name is Lucas. I'm 22 years old. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, um, which is a lovely little country in my experience. It's rainy. It's raining right now. It's just a bit, iffy, but things are really good here, like secure, and they work. And that was a really good environment to grow up in. Um, Basically, to fast forward, what I'm doing right now, I'm doing this podcast that you just mentioned, that came forth out of a desire to connect with people more deeply, which I think sometimes is difficult in a modern day world. Like I would have people that I've known for years and never had a conversation longer than 20 minutes. And like I've had with the both of you, I could just talk to you for an hour and a half. And I think that's an awesome medium um, to connect to people with. And so that's what I'm doing YouTube wise. It's not a full time thing at all. It's something that adds to my life, but it's not a main priority. I am a school teacher starting this month for little kids. I'm still gonna have to find my age exactly, but I'll
Hmm.
get some exposure in the coming weeks, and we'll see what fits best. But anywhere, age 4 to 11, and I'll be teaching like Dutch and mathematics and stuff. So that'll be fun.
Cool,
And I'm
cool. I didn't
also
know that.
thanks. Yeah, it's recent. It's recent because
Yeah.
I finished the BA in Egyptology, which we'll get to later. Um, Thought about which master I would do, and then I was like, do I need to do a master's? And then I saw this pop up on my path, which because of a shortage in the Netherlands for teachers, they've facilitated the path to become a teacher where you can start right away, basically, and you do the education in 2 years instead of four. So yeah, that's going to be more of a full-time thing, and then I'm also a trainer at a gym. Um, that's very part-time. So yeah, that's a bit about who I am. And then in terms of ideas, something you asked about, what a lot of us I think are focused on, what we share is this interest in, I guess I always try to capture it with a couple of words, but it's difficult, like spirituality, religion, meaning. Um, it's kind of difficult to put our finger on, but um, I think a lot of people felt that there's been something missing. John Vervaeke has outlined this in a series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, that we're going through a crisis in meaning. And that really grabbed me, this idea. And it was very true for myself in my life, as a kid, especially, where I would really worry about death and I would worry about loneliness and I would lack meaning in my life. I wouldn't see a clear path. And that seems to be true for our society at large, at least in the Western world. And so some of this has to do with the fall of religion. And yeah, that's something I think about a lot and I consume a lot of content in. And it's something that in my podcast I speak about a lot as well. So
Hmm.
I think I'll leave it there for now.
That's great. That's perfect. And you, Emily.
Okay, my name is Emily. I am from Michigan originally. I now live in Eastern Europe with my husband, who's from here in Bulgaria, and I have a son. He's a year and a half, or just a little over a year and a half now. I'm an artist. I went to art school. I studied illustration, but I didn't really find anything that I really wanted to do with that until after college because what I was really interested in was religious imagery, basically. And let's see, you asked about what is our interest really? And it's kind of like this intersection, I guess, between religious imagery and symbolism and narrative and how that interacts with our experience, like the structure of our experience, how that interacts with narrative. And illustration means um, it's images that have to go with a narrative. It's not just
Hmm.
fine art, making anything. It's how to tell a story with an image. So there's kind of pulling some of those things together and making it up as I go because I didn't really want to do kids' books exactly or something like that. I was very influenced at the time by Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures when he put those out. I think the first thing that I did that I really thought this is what I'd like to focus on was listening to those lectures and then going through the first few stories in Genesis for months, focusing on one story and the patterns, and then making big drawings that were trying to get really deeply into the patterns and just focus on that. So let's see, that was maybe I started doing that almost 10 years ago, and it's just kind of unfolded from there. Um, and it's kind of a rabbit hole, I guess. It doesn't really end. So that's mostly what I focus on now.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I'm already going to deviate from this conversation outline that I laid out because I think that's a good segue into the Jordan Peterson Genesis series had a big impact on me, and I noticed that I can sort of there's a couple things I noticed, but you can sort of see it in other people in a weird way when like that when they've gone through that series and they understand it. Like we were saying, a lot of times it like infects your vocabulary a little bit. But he was able to repackage those stories in a way that was, he was speaking in a lot of ways to an academic audience. And so maybe those of us who kind of came from a religious background and that deteriorated a little bit as we got older. I should say because I don't know that this is exactly the case for you guys, but I know for me, um, going through that series made the stories a bit more concrete, and then it provided a more specific path on how to apply those things to my life. And so I know like the Abrahamic stories and then the story of Jacob. My full name is Jacob. And that, I went and was like in a darker time of life, I'd say during that time. And I went and read Genesis like in a peculiar state of mind. And those things um they had a big impact on how I was living my life. And so first I'd want to ask you guys, when you went through that series, what do you think it was that was going on there that had such a big impact on you? Just that question to start. I'll start with you, Em.
Mm. I think I listened to that series. I mean, it was on repeat on my phone and my computer for a few years, which is excessive, I think, probably, but I tend to get excessive when I really, really want to understand something. So I'd be at work listening to the series. I'd go home, I'd be listening to it on the weekend, like working on drawings and things. So it was it's weird to think now. I don't know how ingrained it's become because I kind of had it there for like so heavily for a while. But um yeah, coming from a kind of like a religious background, but it was breaking apart and it didn't apply to my life at all. I could not figure out how this actually was practical or pragmatic in any way. I couldn't live it out unless I was just going to use kind of empty phrases on people or something like that. And I really didn't like that. Um,
Hmm.
so bringing it into your experience was such a big deal, and I haven't encountered that with regular church folks. I guess not that I've been through all the church folks that there are, but it doesn't seem emphasized. So bringing it into the psychological and and your everyday life in this way that's just deeper. It is at a deeper level than kind of just thinking about Bible verses or something like that. Um, and he really put out like this call, I think especially that hit certain people who are going through kind of a dark time maybe, or who are transitioning from young, like teenager to adult, kind of, that bumpy little phase right there where you're not really sure what's going on. And he like very fatherly way told you what you should do. And I wasn't hearing that from anywhere else either, so that was a big deal, and it sounded like something you would actually want to do. It wasn't just kind of, I don't know, he's so dramatic, he's so emotional. It hit every level. So just to, I don't know, um, at least the first few bullet points about why that was important, I think,
Hmm.
kind of oriented me in the right direction, I think, to help get out of some of those problems that I wasn't finding a solution for anywhere else, sadly. It
Hmm.
it really, really helped. Um, Probably like the biggest thing actually was that series. So that
Yeah,
was a
it's
great thing for me.
interesting. It's so, the fact that that he did the series on Genesis, not it wasn't the Gospels, it wasn't, a number of other things that you could do a biblical lecture series on. And Genesis is so foundational in that way. And so I think when we've like abandoned, like speaking broadly in a society sense, when we've abandoned like what's at the base, what's at the core, then when you hear those things, it's like you were saying it was about orienting yourself properly, and even just have somebody that's saying like you need to orient yourself. It's like what are you aiming at? There's the I often think of there's this great line from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which there I might have a question for you, Lucas, about this later too, but uh but there's it's the Uncle Iroh, he's talking to Zuko, and there he gives this great speech, and at the end of it he's like, who are you and what do you want?
It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big question: who are you? And what do you want?
And it's like the most basic questions that are rarely asked. The Stoics are like, say that you should know yourself, right? And it's like, who are you? Nobody knows. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows what they want. People go to see therapists for these sorts of things, which is which I studied psychology as well. And that lane of things made sense to me, but also too, I think that a lot of times in the psychological world, there's an attempt to secularize things that are spiritual and religious at the same time. So just a thought on that, Lucas. So what was what was the significance of that series
Mm.
for you?
Well, so I was about 18, I think, when I listened to this, and this was when I had my gap year. So after high school, this was like COVID hitting, and so I had a lot of time. And my brother is a philosophy teacher. He'd been aware of Jordan Peterson for a couple of years, and he'd always spoken about him a lot. Um, he always told me I should listen to his stuff and to the biblical lectures and like Java Veki as well. I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But yeah, this came at a time of my life where I was really searching for who I was. Back to the question, yeah. Um, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do in life, but this was when I started to meditate and when I started to become a bit more open to my religious upbringing because I'd kind of abandoned it as a teenager. Um, because yeah, similarly to what Emilee said, I think I couldn't see how it was even relevant to me, to be honest. and then um, I started listening to this guy lecturing about just a couple of lines in Genesis, and it's like, whoa, there is so much more in that than I could have ever imagined. And I used to have to read the Bible every day. Um, like after dinner, we would read it, and I would always just not pay attention. And I was like, wow. Um, and then a lot was just the points he was making in between. I mean, the first episode, I don't think he even gets to one of the lines from the Bible, but he just starts to speak about the Bible itself and the structure. I recently re-listened to the first episode actually after I spoke to Emilee because I was like curious to how I would respond to it now.
Hmm.
He made my lived reality so much more meaningful than I thought it was, and that's not like he created that or like it's his doing that now all of a sudden my life is meaningful. I think the meaning was there. I think the importance was there, but he just made me aware of it. He made me aware of the gravity of my life, let's say. Um, and like after listening to that, I could never be cynical about life anymore because I realized that I have a massive responsibility, an opportunity to do good. And then he also just he bridges the gap between the academic slash intellectual and the religious in a way that it re-enchants it, or it makes it accessible for us, but then also mystical in a way. Like some of the things he would speak about relating to consciousness, for example, like we don't understand this, we don't understand that, and this and this and this you take for granted, and all these presuppositions that you think are normal and part of your reality are actually so dependent on, well, partially the Bible, but yeah, this whole heritage that a lot of us are now cynical about in the West. So yeah, he just made me aware of the larger cultural, societal thing, and then the more individual, practical responsibility thing. And then after listening to that, I was also like, I want to get married. You know, like that was the series for me that made me want to do that. That
Hmm.
was my turning point, let's say.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that's I think mainly.
Yeah. The marriage side of things, I think when you're wrestling with these ideas, it just matures you, and then you realize like there's, in his classes that he was teaching at university, I feel like he touched on this a little bit more, but this like um being aware of the fact that you have to sacrifice your potential to manifest a reality, and that you can't, and that as time passes you by, it is being sacrificed. It's one of those things, like we talked about last time, that like your time is a scarce resource, and so it's passing, and yeah, stepping into that next phase of life and continuing through that hero's journey of sorts, I think is something that when people are not discussing that, that's when you see the young men that stay in the Peter Pan phase who turn into old men in the Peter Pan phase. And it's like, not ideal, it seems. It seems not ideal.
Mm.
Um, you just said something about re-enchantment. So somebody clipped uh a section of our conversation. I thought they had an excellent eye in where they cut and they added some music to it. And I think it was titled Re-enchantment. I've heard this phrase thrown around a little bit, but do either of you like what's going on with the re-enchantment thing? Like, what does it mean? And like,
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen people discussing this a little bit lately.
Well, Emilee, you can go after me because I think Emilee, you discussed it on one of the episodes that I listened in preparation for our conversation, being something that like you kind of know what it means, but it's really hard to explain at the same time.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
but it's so basically for a lot of people, what the world has felt like for the last decades, maybe it's like the magic got kind of sucked out of it,
Hmm.
like everything's scientific and explainable, and And I think re-enchantment as a term is an effort to, yeah, to basically re-enchant the world, to rediscover the magic that actually never left, but it's just something that we, through our paradigm, stopped seeing. And so getting the eyes to see, um, yeah, what is there and the wonders that are there. And it's an effect that the lectures had on me partially, where, you know, it remystified the world in a sense, you know, like there's all these things that are like, you
Remystified.
know,
Mm.
yeah, but I'm not sure if this is actually what it means, but it's what it means to me, let's say. But Emilee, you can add to that what you think is useful.
I think that's a good definition. I was hoping you would have a definition because I really still don't know what it means exactly, but you kind of feel what it means. Um,
Mm.
there is definitely we look at the world like it's dead and mechanical now, or at least, we in this kind of generalized societal way we do that. And it's really disturbing once you see it and then you realize it's everywhere. Like you're watching TV and everything is like I remember it hitting me one point watching a crime show or something and they were doing an autopsy. And it's like kids can watch it, anybody can watch this. It's on regular TV. And I was suddenly horrified that they were showing somebody's body being taken apart in this really casual way because it's really just a machine that you go and look, see which parts are broken and diagnose it like a car or something. And I think there usually was a huge taboo around what is it? You know what I mean. You're not supposed to mess with dead bodies and the dead, and you're
Yeah.
supposed to show a lot of respect and things like that. But that's how we interact with the world now. Like it's dead.
Mm.
Like we're alive, but everything else is dead and we can just do whatever we want with it. Um, and I think re-enchantment is kind of this rediscovering that actually everything is alive and it there's different types of consciousness in the world that you're interacting with that you don't know about and you don't understand. They're interacting with you. You're just oblivious to it. And people used to know that. And we don't now for whatever reason. We don't have any respect for it either. Unless it's really late at night. Like if you wake up at like 3 in the morning, you will feel that feeling, if you hear a
Mm.
noise in the dark, but otherwise it's gone. We're too busy um for things like spirits and entities, or I don't know, a place having like a personality or an agency or something like that. I don't know the exact definition, but I think
Mhm.
it's that kind of rediscovery of that worldview, I think.
Mhm. It's sort of antithetical to the materialist paradigm, I guess, in some ways. Like it's like yeah, as children, we believe in things like magic and, we might not say spirits, but, you kind of like, there's that childlike openness that we seem to lose as we get older. And then maybe the re-enchantment. We'll talk about psychedelics in a little bit, and each of us have had some sort of experience with that. And for me, I had a couple experiences that afterwards I was like, this stuff, like atoms and physical things, that's not all that there is, that's not all that's real, and like the deep, deep understanding of metaphysical reality and spiritual reality. And, we'll use words that are loaded, I'd assume, a lot through this conversation. But oftentimes when people, I notice, like when I'm talking with somebody and if you use the word spirit and it like throws them off and they're like, oh, I'm off now, like I'm not with you, you know? I will invite someone to say, or like if I've written something, it's like you can read pattern of behavior. You can read like pattern of existence. If the word like spirit is like, spiritual, blah, that's not real. It's like read pattern, of behavior or existence, and then stay on with me, And I find that people, even if they're still in that materialist worldview, you know, they can wrap their head around that. Um, Okay. Hello, audience, breaking the third wall. Um, I'm just this is our first time doing this, so I'm stumbling through this. It's my first time doing this, stumbling through this outline here. I'm gonna pull us back to a little bit more about the two of you, and then I'm gonna pull us back to this little corner conversation stuff. So, Lucas, your bio on X, I thought this was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But your bio on X is identity is not something I can give myself. You can give it a go, which I thought was interesting. But what do you mean by this?
Yeah, so I got on Twitter, back on Twitter like 2 years ago or something, and I had to fill in, a bio about what you are, what you do. And I've always felt for myself that that changes all the time, like, or I would say like I'm a student or whatever, and it felt like it never touched upon what I really am or who I am. So first, the identity thing is funny because I think it's often reduced. And second, it's a bit of a response to the subjective view on identity nowadays, where people will decide who they are, and this is not necessarily gender identity or whatever, but even more than that, just identifying as whatever you feel like, or um, who you think you are. But with the bio, I kind of respond to the subject object view of the world, I guess. This is really nerdy, by the way. Like, I just wrote it down one day. Never thought I would be questioned about it, but
Sure.
and basically, like, identity is something you need to negotiate. This is a point Peterson makes really brilliantly. I think it's something that is not exactly decided by yourself. It's not fully decided by another exactly, but it's in the relationship between the two. So that's where that came from originally. Um, but I might update it at some point. I think it still misses something, but yeah, that's what that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of like the idea of identity or even sanity is like a relationship, you know? And the
Mhm.
sanity side of things I think of a lot. And I think you guys could probably relate to this in that, like, from a psychological perspective, insanity is just like deviation from norm, you know? And a lot of times when I think of things that are considered like mental illnesses, things that you'd find in the in the DSM-5 or whatever, right? They're they're they fall on spectrums, and oftentimes they're standard distributions. And so um, something that might be pathological, let's say, if you were diagnosed with agoraphobia, it's just like a predisposition towards negative emotion or anxiety that's just like past the second percentile, you know? And then people at like 97th or 96th or 95th or 94th or wherever they are, you know, you wouldn't meet the criteria. I'm dramatically overgeneralizing, but you know, a lot of these things fall on spectrums, right? And so when it comes to creativity, you think of people like Jordan, you think of people like Kanye West, you think of people like Elon Musk, um, who the more creative they are, the more like unstable they are sometimes, the more creative they are, the seemingly almost, depending on your perspective, the more like insane they almost seem, you know, they seem like less what in your category of sanity. Um, in my ramblings on this, I've forgotten my question. So let me look at my outline. Um, no, I totally lost it.
It was interesting though.
Okay.
It got me thinking
That's good to
about
hear.
like that. No, but it's all good if you don't remember it. The artist, I think it's an archetype as well. The artist, where the artist sees things before the. I think it's something like the artist can sense these patterns before anyone can put it into words. So what you're doing when you're making art is you're like um, you're closer to reality in a sense, but
Hmm.
in some sense you're also insane because you're seeing things that other people can't. So it's like, whoa, what's
Yeah,
wrong
yeah,
with you,
yeah.
you know? But the artist oftentimes is a precursor to what's to come, sees things before they do, and then later on they get articulated. And yeah, but there's a reason Kanye has a wrecked personal life. Doesn't mean you have to. I mean, Emilee is a great example. She has a child and a husband. She's doing very well for herself. so, so it's not like you're doomed as an artist, but yeah.
I guess how would you say that you manage that, Emilee, in terms of like in terms I mean specifically, how do you manage the like instability, and replace the word if you feel like there's a better word, but that the you guys talked about chaos in your last conversation too, like kind of living closer to that edge. I'll leave it there.
Manage. I don't know that I can manage the instability. I mean, it hopefully appears like I'm managing the instability, and that might be that's good. As long as that's good. If other people don't think I'm insane, then probably we're okay because, having an internal chaos is sometimes just internal. Everybody doesn't
Hmm.
have to know about it.
Hmm.
Um, and that might be fine. Um, I don't know. I think what you said about artists do. I remember just when you were talking about Jordan or Kanye, I remember when Peterson first got big, I remember my mom seeing like a clip of him and she was like, "Oh, he'd be very hard to be married to." He was ranting, he was walking across the stage and throwing his hands and acting nuts, really. I mean, he looks pretty manic a lot of the time, or he
Yeah,
used to,
right.
especially. And it was so funny because I was like, oh, he's so brilliant. This is crazy. And my mom is like, oh, I wouldn't want that at home, though, right? Like, you wouldn't want to be around
Hmm.
something like that all the time. Like, that would be a lot to have dinner with somebody like that every day or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I think for me, the in managing the kind of just being really open is I've had to really make decisions that are tailored for me and my oddities. And other people can be very uncomfortable by that because, let's say you're surrounded by more conservative, conscientious people. Um, they really don't know why, they have no idea what I'm talking about or why I have a preference for one thing over another or something like that. So I think hopefully it's staying grounded as best you can, and then realizing that being a little bit odd means you might have to make odd choices because they're going to work for you, but you're going to look a little nuts to other people. And
Hmm.
just remembering that, like the back and forth, like this works for me, and I'm trying to make it work, and it's totally not going to work for you. Other people
Does that
shouldn't do
ever
this.
bother you guys to be um like to not be normal? Did you ever see appeal in normality, or was it scary for you to break out of that box at a certain point in time in your life?
You can go first, Emilee, if you like.
Yeah, I would say that I would prefer, I've always wanted to just look really normal.
Oh,
Um,
really?
I
Okay.
really wanted to blend in. I really did not. I wasn't
Huh.
like trying to stand out. I never dyed my hair a weird color. I didn't do like get facial piercings or whatever. Like I went to art school. You see a lot of things, and I was just like, I just want to sink into the wall, like just don't look at me.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's been really uncomfortable most of the time, but I think the more I'm like realizing that I just have different temperament than certain people, that I'm more comfortable with that, and then it's staying grounded with that knowledge. So it's less comfortable now or uncomfortable than it used to be. It used to be so uncomfortable all the time because I was like, why am I not like everybody else? Like why am I doing weird things all the time? And it was only weird in relation to somebody who's like going to school to be an engineer or, a teacher or you know what I mean. It's relative a little bit.
Hmm.
So it's gotten better. Yeah.
I'll say for myself, I actually had the same thing when I was a kid. That I wanted to be normal. Like, I remember getting taller, and I had like a prognosis for how tall I would get, and I was like, I don't want that. I want to be smaller. Like I, I just wanted to be normal, and that was because I was like insecure as a kid, so I just didn't want to stand out. So I would be like singled out or whatever, and I just wanted to blend in. But then I think as I got like 17, 18, I kind of had the opposite thing and like a reaction to it. I was like, oh, actually, I would hate to be normal and I want to be excellent, like perfect. Um, which I'm not sure where that came from actually. But but now I'm like I'm aware that I'm quite different from other people in many ways. I live my life a bit differently. I'm not trying to have a very successful career money wise, or I'm not into like partying so much or dating around. But that's actually I'm very comfortable in that. And I'm happy also to have a lot of different people around me to speak to and to learn from. So I actually really like it now because it makes people open up to you more often when
Hmm.
when you get to know someone, like when someone just meets me and they see me as like, a gym bro or whatever, they like they have a different position towards as opposed to when you speak to them for half an hour or whatever. And then because I'm different and maybe because I'm like married and whatnot and thinking about the world in a different way, they open up to you much more. So it's actually it's been quite a strength in my life, a fun thing, a good thing. So
Hmm.
yeah.
That's interesting. I was maybe expecting, I guess I had similar oscillations perhaps, but I think pretty early on I was like horrified of normality. I like was like I the like and I there's probably deeper implications as to why this was the case, but from a young age I was just like it just horrified me. I didn't want it. And then but I would also say too, so walk down the path of my life a little bit, I got to a point in time about 4 or 5 years ago where where I'd been like making music and I was living in LA and in this like hyper pre-woke, like woke sort of ecosystem. And it was a bubble for sure. But breaking out of that, even for me, so you were saying, I remember you guys saying going over your personality, uh, like the big five elements, and you were more agreeable. Lucas, where do you think you fall on agreeableness?
I'm like 72 or something, so I'm quite agreeable.
Quite
Uh,
agreeable. Okay.
I'm mostly very polite. That's a
Oh,
very
that's
nice.
so interesting.
What
So
is the other
I'm
one? What is the other one in agreeableness? I'm not sure. Do any of you know? It's
like on the other
politeness.
end of the distribution.
Well, you
Oh,
have
oh,
like
within it.
it's yeah, subsection. So you have politeness and
Politeness and empathy, I believe, or something
compassion. Yeah,
along those lines.
yeah,
Compassion.
compassion. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
So
So my
my
politeness really,
scores,
but
I was like super impolite as I'm sitting here interrupting you as you're on my show and I'm asking you questions and then interrupting you. So I was like first percentile impolite or something. And then my agreeableness was relatively like middle ground for men, I think it was, but I was high in empathy and like first percentile in politeness. But and then the I was more like I tended towards the disagreeable side of the spectrum. And so I think for me that was um it was comfortable for me to like not I didn't really need to fit in. I think that I was okay with being like, this is just, who I am. Like, I think I was a little bit of a polarizing figure when I was younger too. Like my teachers and classmates, they either like really liked me or they were like, this freaking kid, like get him out of here. Um, but um I struggled with this in terms of like fitting in. There's the agreeableness and disagreeableness side of things, but then the sanity side of things, right? When you're in a position where 90% of the people around you are like, you're wrong, and like if you think that you're evil, you go, oh shoot, well, am I wrong? You know, like, is this right? Like if you're like a properly socialized human, you should be like, okay, well, a bunch of these people think this, perhaps I'm wrong, right? It's a reasonable thing. And then I think once I realized that, like, oh no, my like acceptance is not my God, like I care more about truth and love than like social acceptance. Um, it took a while, but I had to like break out of this. But then I'd kind of gone along with it for a bit, right? I'd kind of gone along with the like, okay, well, it's no big deal. Everything's fine. I'm just hanging out, having a good time, like making music, shooting videos for people, kind of being in the entertainment scene. And I had this rough, like, breaking out of like, no, 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 no. Perhaps I'm not who you think I am. Like all of, I think I was talking with a friend yesterday, but I had like 10,000 followers on Instagram and I have like less than 6,000 now. And there was a moment in time once I started, and a lot of this was I would say it was a path Peterson took me down, but it was more Solzhenitsyn of like, don't lie, don't do
Mhm.
it. Like,
Yep.
watch out. Like, do not say things that you know not to be true. You will walk yourself and everyone you love and care about into the pits of hell. And like, you will have done it. Like, watch it, and that horrified me. Even now, it almost makes me emotional because I think I know, I don't know what that means, but I know damn close to what that means. I spent a lot of time reading about it. I spent a lot of time reading about it high, actually. So I like smoked weed and would like read the Gulag Archipelago and just be like, oh no, like this is, and especially in a time where, so that was the impetus for me to break out of that, the like, oh, I want to fit in, I want people to like me, I want whatever. And it's like, no, 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 no. Let's not make this earth a living hell. If you sat around and tried to imagine how bad things could get, you could not even get close to like what has actually happened to us and what could actually happen again. So I'm gonna go to this little corner stuff. It's sort of new to me a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah.
So I first saw one of my first introductions. I'd watched a few Vanderklay videos, right? Vanderklay connected to Peterson, that sort of stuff. I saw Emilee on Vanderklay's and and somebody else's that was like this little corner. I forget who, but that was a big thing. And I'd come across your art, I forget how. And then more recently, I've been like, wait, wait, wait. In my personal life, I'm always looking for people like this, and I like can't find anybody that like gets it, man. I can't find anybody who's interested in the same ideas. And then there's a bunch of these people who have been talking to each other for a while, it seems, that speak the same language that I speak. So what is this little corner, and like what is your guys's loose association with it up until this point? Whoever
You
wants
can
to
go
start.
ahead. Oh, me? Okay.
Sure.
Well, Emilee has like the right to start because she was in it much before me. So you go ahead.
Okay.
Uh, sure, yeah. Let's see. I spoke to Paul in, was it 2000, early 2019. And so Jordan Peterson he got like pretty popular in 2017 and 18, and he had so much new stuff that was really exciting at like right around then. That was kind of like peak stuff, but there wasn't that many people talking about it. And I saw in my YouTube feed or whatever, there was this pastor, he had a huge white beard and he's talking about Jordan Peterson, and I was like, "Ooh, okay." And plus he's a Dutch last name, and like I live in the town he went to college in, Calvin College or Calvin University or whatever, because it's CCR, it's Christian Reformed like hotspot. So I was like, oh, it's kind of like familiar something something. And I was watching him for a little bit, and he was just talking to people who were watching Jordan Peterson stuff, and he was like, why do you like this? And it was the weirdest. I'd never seen anybody do anything like that before. It was kind of there was like Joe Rogan podcast, there's like some podcasts and stuff, but it wasn't like it is now where everybody all the time is doing podcasts and talking to people online. So he was kind of like way ahead. It felt like maybe I was just in that little sphere. It was way ahead. So he would talk to people and just ask them about their relationship with Christianity and their kind of journey with, faith, or maybe they were atheistic or whatever, and how Peterson was affecting them. And other pastors were not doing that. He's really open. And so he kind of facilitated, and the
Mm.
people who would talk to him were then like, I need to talk to the other people because everybody was so excited. So I was just watching for a little bit, and then I finally got in touch with him because I think he brought
So
up
it
Alex
did start
Jones.
from Vanderklay. It like he was kind of like
Yeah,
the
that was
okay,
his thing. Yeah, yeah.
gotcha,
But he
gotcha.
eventually got in touch with Pajot and Vervaeke, and now they're all kind of buds. At least they were talking semi-regularly for a while, which was super cool. But the audience kind of like the comment section was like thoroughly embedded with each other. There was like a Discord quickly made, and it was really interactive. Like everybody was talking all the time. So, um, and everybody kind of got to know each other. So it became like this tight-knit group, but everybody spoke the same internet language because we were all watching
Mm,
the same stuff. So
mhm.
that's why you're like, oh, where's the tribe? It's like it's because there's like a jargon, there's like a sub language that we're all speaking, that if you walk up to someone on the sidewalk, they don't know what you're talking about. So that's why it's really nice. It means communication actually flows for certain ideas. So anyway, there's like this little corner is loosely the channels that popped up around Vanderklay, and some of the like Lucas, who did you talk to? You talked to Karen Wong, the meaning code,
Yeah,
I think.
in Sevilla.
Right. Yes, they're both kind of in there. There's like Grizz. Grizz is awesome. He's like there's just a bunch of little channels floating around, and
Yeah.
everybody kind of talks. It's this weird internet network of
That's
religious
so cool.
oddballs.
It's so
Yeah,
cool. I'm
it's
like,
really weird. But
yeah.
but they call it this little corner. So there's like that's what the corner is this corner of the internet where people are discussing this kind of stuff. And they've been at it for a while.
Yeah.
And they really care. So anyway, that's I talked to Paul once or twice, and that's how I got into that. But it's still going. I think it's still going pretty strong. I've kind of like backed out of it, because I have
Mm.
more real life stuff going on now than I did before. But yeah, it's still very present, I think.
Mm, mhm.
So Lucas, how did you get into that like later?
Yeah, so I was listening while you were like talking to Paul. I never listened to Paul van der Kley ever actually until quite recently after I met him in person. Um, but I just listened to Peterson for Vake. I was turned on to that, and then Jonathan Pajot, who has a YouTube channel, Symbolic World. He's a icon carver, but now he mostly, I think, also does his YouTube channel. So he's an Orthodox Christian. Um, And so Jonathan Pajot, John Vervaeke, who was a cognitive scientist, among other things, actually. Jordan Peterson and then Paul van der Kley are like the four main figures of that.
Horsemen
But I,
of this
huh?
little corner. The four horsemen of this little corner.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. And so people that are aware of all four, I think, are often like into this little corner. But I was for a long time just aware of the three. So I never had people to interact with because partially that was because I already spoke to my brother and my dad about these things. Like I kind of had my
mm,
itch scratched in that regard. So I didn't really need to talk to many other people. And I had like some friends that were into similar things. Um, but yeah, I met Paul at some point because he came to the Netherlands for like a festival thing. And I saw him in Amsterdam and we were gonna like see Amsterdam together. And he looked at me, he's like, "Hey, I know you from YouTube." It's really funny.
mm. Nice, nice.
That was like the first time I'd met someone that I'd like that had seen me on YouTube before I'd met them. So that was really funny.
Mhm.
But yeah, Paul is kind of the person that made this thing into a community because he started talking to all these people that were like yeah, well, random people, calls them randos. So like people that are into this stuff and that want to do their story or that want to like make this more embodied. And he made that happen. And he's like a machine. Like he uploads so much content. He's a pastor. So he has his own little church in Canada, I think. Is that true?
Sacramento,
Sacramento. So
California.
California.
What's
Yeah.
what's the Dutch connection to this little corner? You said he has a Dutch last name. You both are Dutch, yes?
No.
Well, I'm
Well,
American, but
but yeah.
Dutch immigrant family, kind of.
Okay.
I mean, we have a Dutch last name, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Gotcha,
I think
gotcha.
I think the Dutch connection isn't actually like that strong, but I think because Paul is like his name sounds Dutch, and Vervaeke actually is also a Belgian name, which is funny. Um, but you know, Paul's name, like Vanderkla, is not actually his real family name, but his family changed that because they were like during the time of the Nazis, they didn't want to be found out because he was actually Jewish, so the family was Jewish, and then he just changed it to a regular Dutch name. But but yeah, so the area that Emilee's from, I guess, is more Dutch Reformed, and then there's some Dutch people that are more present in the corner, but not that many, to be fair.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think it's a major thing. I think there's some
No,
people in the Netherlands who listen though. There's like a large enough chunk, I believe.
yeah, like we have
There's
now our embodied like little community here as well that we like
Yeah.
see each
okay.
other every month for like a little dinner and whatever, so it's quite fun.
Mhm.
But yeah,
I grew up going to this like non-denominational, not particularly traditional church, and we talked about that a bit before, but then I went to a Baptist university for school, which was like, and then I got there and people were like, they like paid attention to people's denomination, they it was because they knew more about it. I didn't know that much really. But I had a few. There's like, I feel like there's like a Dutch pocket of California, like central and somewhat Southern California. And so there was, I just remember I had some friends there who like kind of all followed the same, I think they're in the same denomination sort of thing. Um, yeah, what denomination did you grow up in, both of you, and what's like a little summary about that? Where does it fall on the spectrum of order and chaos, maybe, in terms of Christian denominations?
yeah. I'll start. So I actually didn't know that denominations existed as a kid, like until I was 16. I was like, no
Mhm.
idea about this. And then at some point I started to become aware of the differences. But I think I was raised like Protestant in the broad sense of the word. The church I grew up in was like 99% old people. So you could like count the heads of people. I was in the back of the church and they were just either gray or bald. And this is like a funny thing. And
Mhm.
it's just like the songs were like lifeless almost. So I grew up in a very boring church environment, which is one of the reasons I think I went away from it. Um, but yeah, I'd say largely Protestant that I grew up in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't grow up going to church, actually. Um, we went on Christmas and Easter, I think, most of the time. And that was kind of it. So I was confused. I went to Bible school in the summer, which was like a little day camp thing, and that was kind of the most that I did. My dad was really insistent when I was little that I read the Bible. So I had a lot of children's Bibles when I was really small, and I loved the pictures. And then when I was bigger, I read the Bible quite a bit, because my dad was he had this idea. I think it's like Protestantism, like extra, where you're so Protestant that you don't go to church anymore because you insist that everybody can kind of figure it out on their own.
Mhm.
And so the kind of this hyper individualism kind of thing, or maybe just I don't know. He didn't maybe he I suspect he probably didn't like the church environment is what it was. It was probably boring and nobody likes the music. So something like that. So I just grew up reading the Bible a lot, but when I met actual church people eventually when I got into like my early 20s, I was shocked because they have a whole ecosystem and I didn't know the lingo and I don't understand the jargon and the like the manners that I'm supposed to
Oof, the
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 etiquette.
Christianese was always tough for me when it's like you're just saying these words you've heard somebody say and you're spitting them back out at me and you're not even talking to me. Like it just, which I sort
It's
of had to
uncomfortable.
like, I had to like let that go a bit and like be like, okay, I gotta like take it easy on people. You know, these people are just trying to, they're doing the same thing I'm doing, which is like trying to sort through ideas and figure stuff out. And I don't need to come in here and be like, oh, you all are fake, because, whom among us is real exactly. But
Right. But it's off-putting when you're not part of that. It's
sure.
very off-putting. I mean, I liked being around them because they at least like had values that they would put forward, whereas like more secular people that I was around, they didn't seem to care about almost anything. Um, but still, it was like I didn't really know what to do with that. So I really always liked the stories, and I think we were just I think it's like hyper Protestantism to be honest, because my dad made sure that like I would pray and I would know the stories, but he's like, we don't actually have to mesh into a community with this. This doesn't have to be like a shared values kind of thing, um, which I don't really think works in the end.
Hmm.
But yeah, so
Mhm.
that's where I came out of that.
Well,
Kind of
quickly,
disintegrated.
just for the question that you started with, like where it fits on the spectrum. So I told you like I didn't have any awareness of like the different denominations, but like broadly, from my understanding now, so Protestantism is more liberal, more open to anyone from the outside, let's say, and you have like so many like endless denominations within Protestantism, um, partially because it like protests against what was, let's say, and then once you've opened that rabbit hole, it's like you can endlessly like protest against the next one and the next one and the next one and
Hmm.
like create your own
Interesting.
little thing, which is where all these different denominations I think came from. And then I think that you have like Catholicism, which is a bit more about ritual and less. So to go back to Protestantism for a second, there's like a long sermon, like you get a guy speaking in front of you, which will take a while, and ritual is less important. So I grew up not having communion often. So what is it? How do I say in English proper? Communion is good.
Yeah, yeah. Communion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would have it like every once in a while, but it'd be kind of something weird. Whereas I think in Catholicism you have it every service that you go to. So it's ritual is more important. Um, and I think rules are generally more important the more um, orthodox you get, let's say. So um, orthodoxy is I think like hardcore Christianity to
Hmm.
explain it in some way. Like you do the fasting, the services are like extremely long. It's so much ritual. There's incense, and it's like it's
It's
almost
in
going
some
back to
ways,
the basis. Go ahead.
yeah, is it like it's like a continuation of, it's almost like, it almost seems to me, let me step back three times. Jesus, Jesus, when, in the Gospels, he was like, I've often conceptualized it in some writing as like the dark knight in the tyrannical order, so to speak, right? So he's the will it focus? He's the dark, he's the dark dot in the tyrannical order, right? So in the Jewish law, there was like, you follow these, it was more orthodox in that,
Mm.
in the sense that you're presenting right now, where, when Jesus came up to the guy whose sheep had fallen into a ditch on the Sabbath, he was like, okay, we have rules. The rules are important, but like he basically was saying like the spirit of things is what truly matters, and the rules should be pointing you to the spirit. And so if there's a time where, it aligns with the less rigid to break the rules, then
Yeah,
that's okay. It was like a rebalancing in that.
for sure.
Um, I keep on getting self-conscious in that technical sense, of like noticing that I'm
Yeah.
talking and then noticing myself, noticing that I'm talking, and then I'm paying attention to that self, and then I lose self number one, where self number one is going. So
I will
I'm
add
sure you
something
guys
to
can
what you
relate.
said.
Yeah.
Can I add something there? Because so you can read the New Testament in many different ways, and in many ways, Jesus was like revolutionary. Like what you're saying, you have this whole structure, and he's basically breaking that open. Um, and that's the interesting thing with the denominations. Like, how do you look at that? Do you look at that and say, okay, our religion has to be radically open as well, and has to be like for everyone, because he speaks to the prostitutes, he speaks to the tax collectors and stuff like that.
Mm.
And the Orthodox way of looking at that is like, no, the structure is still very important, and Jesus says that as well. Like you still have to follow the rules. It's also in the spirit. Like the spirit is important, so it goes beyond the rules. Um, and so yeah, there's many different ways to look at that, at that story and that character. Not saying Jesus is a fictional character, but I'm just saying, like, symbolically speaking, like, what does that mean for you in your daily life? But yeah, that's just something that came up for me.
I always used to, I think for most of my life, I viewed right and wrong as rights. Right is over here and wrong is over here, you know? And s- it was a study of Eastern philosophical tradition that sort of changed that for me. And even in my reading of the Gospels, as well as one, I saw Jesus as someone who was a bringer of balance and not someone who, like, and what I mean when I say that, I'll give you two different images maybe. So right, instead of conceptualizing right and wrong as on opposite sides of the spectrum, viewing more like right as the proper balancing of things and wrong as when things have become imbalanced in either direction. You might be, there are times where you need to be soft and tough, and the right thing to do is the proper balancing of the softness and the hardness or the toughness. And then Jesus talked about the pathway to the kingdom of heaven is like straight and narrow. It's like a narrow, straight road. And then in that same conceptualization, I think of that as like being properly balanced. And there's many ways to be improperly balanced and one straight, narrow way to be balanced. You could be slightly in this direction, slightly in that direction. Does that make you think anything?
You can go ahead, Emilee.
Yeah. Um, I think that brings it back to the biblical lectures and Peterson pointing out that you should have one foot in chaos and one in order. So one foot in what's known and one in what's unknown, and that's where you're properly balanced. I'd never heard that before, except in kind of a like Taoist flavored kind of thing, but I wouldn't know what to do with it. Like it's a cool image, but what do you do with it? And then he kind of puts it more pragmatically. Um, about knowing what to do in the moment, which is more like wisdom, right? Rather than just relying on a rigid set of rules. I remember there was a really funny thing he said once that stuck with me so much. He said he was explaining how he had made himself the metropolitan of a church that he made up.
Hmm.
Metropolitan is like a antiquated term like bishop or something like that. He was marrying some friends of his. He was what is it called? Ordaining himself on the internet. And he was describing how he had to make up a church because he could, and so he named it
Wait, I'm
like
sorry. Jordan was saying this?
Jordan was describing this.
Okay.
This was like early on, and he went to go speak at an Orthodox institution. I don't know where. I think it was a
Hmm.
church, and Pedro was there, and he was very tired because a lot of things had happened that week, like in the news with him, with interviews and stuff like that. And he started saying how he made himself the metropolitan of this church that he made up. And it's the church of someone I mentioned when I talked with Lucas. It's Saint Joachim de Fiora, and that guy's idea was that of like there's this idea of the paraclete of the Holy Spirit being like innate in people. And having that means something like choosing, like having the wisdom in the moment to choose like the right and wrong rather than having a black and white rule book, right? So all the time having one foot in order and one foot in chaos, actually, instead of always like rigidly, this is what we do, we never break the tradition, or alternatively being like, we turn over every rule, we break every rule open. So I probably went on kind of a tangent. It's a favorite tangent of mine, but that's what it made me think of.
That's
Mhm,
super cool.
mhm.
Actually, it makes me think of the way in which the different denominations like balance each other out as well. So the Orthodox, they keep the rules stable in that sense, and then the Protestant is like the dynamic chaos that um yeah, that keeps that, it keeps it flowing in a sense. But then the question is for yourself, like, does that mean you just don't throw yourself into any denomination and just like take a bit of both? Because that's how I've been looking at it for a while now, where I'm like, yeah, but now I'm just not going to church. Whereas that's also
Hmm.
something that seems important because it's participation, and it's taking part in reality and in the story and stepping inside of it and having the community and all these arguments that Peterson and Peugeot make, for example. But yeah, so it's found even within the different denominations as well as in your own life, where it's like you got to balance these things, and that's the only way it can keep existing. Because if it's too um, orderly, then it falls away in stone, let's say, and it solidifies too much. And if it's too chaotic, yeah. So it's a brilliant way in which you can see the world and like patterns unfolding societally, politically, in your personal life, how you deal with like a diet. I find it really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just the frame as a whole is so
yeah,
helpful. I don't know how I like existed before. I I pretty much everything that I think about, I'm looking through this like balance frame nowadays. And I realized like I don't even know how I possibly got through existence before, when I was like, oh, like right's over here and wrong's over here, because it just doesn't fit like in like any complex model to me now. But
Mhm.
with that idea of like, okay, no, 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 no. Okay, like I've identified a thing, what's its polarity? How should I be uh dealing with like the tension in between, you know?
Like, how do you relate to it instead of just like chopping everything to bits, kind of,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think.
Hmm. I want to ask you guys, this might take a sec too, but I want to hear if you can give me like some summary of your psychedelic experiences and how that impacted your religious worldview. Like, if it brought you back to one or if it changed it. I'd love to hear each of yours and then ask you some questions about mine as well. So, Emilee, would you like to start?
Sure. Um, let's see how to start. I had just started realizing I was like 19 or 20. Like at 18, as soon as I got out of my house and into college, that I started reading books about early Christianity and about religion because for some reason that was like, this is a gap. I don't understand this, and I really need to understand this. So I was doing that for a couple of years, but it wasn't working. I was just reading like historical criticisms, basically, or hi historical accounts of Christianity, and it was not helping. So this was kind of the central issue that was already present when I tried psychedelics, which isn't necessarily the case for everybody. Um, and I had found Jung, and that was super helpful because I dream a lot and I think in images. So just having that was really helpful. But then I bumped into somebody that just offered me acid almost as soon as we started talking, and that had never happened before. I wasn't like aware of like drugs really before that. I didn't know people who were doing anything like that. Even though I went to art school, it's kind of weird. You would think that that would just be everywhere, but um, it's kind of a conservative town, I guess. So that happened, and I was like, well, yes, because this sounds exciting, and I've heard this kind of intimation that this will give me something new, I guess. and everything was really stale. So I did the thing, and the first time almost nothing happened. I was just like, wow, that was crazy. The second time I had like this mystical kind of experience, that as soon as it was over, I mean, as soon as it happened, really, but after the experience kind of wore off, I knew that I believe in God, that there's no way that I could not believe in God now. And I had really been struggling with that before because I'm like, I don't feel it. Like, it sounds nice, but how do you know? Like, why would I just believe it? Um, it seemed arbitrary. Like, it sounds good, but why? So that happened, and it just blew away every doubt, every not sure why would that be a thing. It was so present, it was so real, and it really showed me how far away I was from living in a way that would be properly in alignment with that. And I did not know how I could get to that place, but I knew that I was really far away from it.
Can I ask how you realized that? Like what was it in the experience that made you realize what were you feeling that made you realize like I'm not living in alignment with those things?
Well, it was so there was a certain point within the experience where it was just so overwhelmingly like this feeling of love and um something that was not me. I mean, it was just it was not me in my head with myself. So, and throughout the rest of the experience, this trip or whatever, the patterns that I was seeing were so tangible. Like I saw that everything has a purpose and a meaning to it that's unfolding all the time. And that everything had to be a part of it. Like I couldn't see that I was necessarily a part of it, but if I saw everything else as a part of it, then I'm like, well, probably I'm in that too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the good part was so good. It wasn't just a feeling of feeling good. It was like there's really nothing else. There's no other thing that you would ever need if you were in that state, I guess. It's very hard to describe, but I don't know, it threw me so far down afterward because it was just this peak experience where I'm like, I don't need anything else. Like if you have this like loving presence that's like all encompassing and there's nothing missing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it made me
Do you
very
mean you
aware of
had to
what was
recover
missing.
from it kind of? It threw you so far down after. Were you like,
I was so aware of how I was missing the mark on so many things. I think I
okay,
didn't know that
uh-huh.
I had agency in my life before that. I really didn't feel like I was acting like a person before that. I was alive, but I was like, well, everything kind of happens to me. I'm kind of like this receptacle for the world just happens to me. I didn't think I could do anything about it or that I had a responsibility. And it had also been like overwhelming myself with Jordan Peterson, but I wasn't really acting on it. It didn't it didn't do anything. I wasn't doing anything with it. It was just in my head. So it just showed me how small I was and how I was just actively making things worse for
Hmm.
myself.
You'd like learned so many new things, but they hadn't been integrated into how you're behaving, and so that you felt that
Totally. Yeah.
dissonance. Hmm.
Yeah. Right. So it was this big experience that comes, but then I'm like, I'm not acting on it. It's not real. I'm not manifesting it in the reality of the world. Like
Hmm.
things that are just in your head aren't really real. I mean, they're real when you make them real outside too. Like the inside and the outside have to kind of match.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, so you
hopefully,
feel
right? Like
that.
that's the
Hmm.
tension. It's horrible. And I was like, oh, it was terrible. So the next few years were really rough, actually, because of that. But I at least knew now. I was like, well, definitely there's a God, and definitely there's a direction to go. So I'm just gonna like that's the only thing now to focus on. There's no other thing as important as that. But it wasn't just hearing a Jordan Peterson lecture and he's like, you have nothing else to do. I'm like, no, I feel it now. Like I feel it. So um so that really changed the direction of my life. And I easily sort of slipped into the Christian, I don't know, I don't go to church, which I kind of feel bad about, but I'm my way of dealing with it is like being soaked in the images, I guess,
Hmm.
and really um, respecting that tradition and wanting to be in touch with it, however that works for me, I guess, or however that makes sense in my context. So, so the I told Paul that I took acid, and I'm like young and acid and this, and he's like, whoa, he's a pastor. He's people aren't telling him that every day. Um, but there's definitely a bunch of people who've had that. I talked to a bunch of people after that who were like, yeah, me too. That was really helpful. So it definitely turned everything around and set me on that direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lucas.
So, do you guys mind if I quickly take a bathroom break? Because I know we
Oh
have a
yeah,
bit.
let's do it. Let's take a
I'm
let's take
used
a
to
little
90
five
minutes.
minute breather. Yeah, yeah,
5
that's
minutes?
perfect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing, by the way, Emilee. I haven't heard it in depth so much, so it's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What was your psychedelic? How did psychedelics affect your
Yeah.
religious view of the world and you as a person?
Yeah. So, like I told you before, I kind of abandoned the Protestantism I was brought up in as a kid. So, my parents told me that I should go to church until I was 18, basically. And then I got so annoying about it that at like 17, they were like, okay, let's just give up on this guy. But I would still like read um, like religious literature with my dad, and we would like discuss it. So we would still have this, but it would take less time, which was nice for me. Um, but yeah, so I finished my high school, got into a gap year, and this was kind of when I like switched gears in my life. I went from being like very cynical, wanting to be normal, like we discussed, to like wanting to be really good and really good in a sense of like really successful. So I started um, meditating and reading and learning musical instruments and like language learning, all these things. I don't know why, but something drove me to do that. And I started listening to podcasts. And yeah, I just heard people talk about psychedelics in such a like magical way. You know, I always spoke about like the magic being sucked out of the world. These were like the
Sure.
first accounts that I heard was like, oh wow, this is actually because when I hear it from religious people, when I used to hear it from religious people, it was like, yeah, okay, but that's all in your head or whatever. But the way these people described it is like, oh, they actually believe that there's something there. Like they
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes they were like much more rational, so to speak, and they would have this experience and it was just like break them open. So that was partially my pull toward it, like a deep curiosity of like what's this actually like, because you know these accounts are magical. And then I kind of have like an extreme personality in the sense that I want to do things fully or not at all. So I went like the most powerful experience I could find. So that was ayahuasca. And like
Oh, you did ayahuasca. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that I seemed like everyone that did that kind of came out of it like what? Like
Where?
everything changed.
In the Netherlands
In the
or?
Netherlands, yeah. So it's
Mhm.
basically illegal, but it's kind of like they have a website and you know, it's kind of like I went to the place and
Buy
they have
some
like
in
a
Bitcoin?
sign. Huh?
You buy some in Bitcoin? No?
Well, I had to pay in cash from like a Romanian
Okay.
bank. So partially went to a Romanian bank and partially was cash. It was kind of shady, but like you
I
could tell
love how we
that the
just chat
Dutch.
about this stuff on the internet. You know, it's all good.
Well, it's
Yeah.
okay because I really think that authorities don't care about it for some reason,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, because it's kind of public. So anyway, did that. My dad brought me there. It's like another side of the country, and
Mm.
my parents were like very involved with me and worried about me as I was doing this because like I was still living with my parents and they're like, you are free to make your own choices, but let us at least like pray for you and try to be
Wow,
there
that's
for
really
you.
special.
Yeah, it was. It was like my dad prayed with me before I went there, and then I was in close contact with them as I got out of it. And it's actually normal to do this experience and then like sleep over there and like talk about your experience with the people that also do it. But I wanted to go home straight that evening. My parents picked me up, and it was actually really bonding, let's say. But that experience was like similar to how Emilee described it, like this abundance of love where it just overwhelmed me to the point of just you're just crying and you're just laughing and it's like I cannot even understand. And I wasn't immediately like God is real, but I was immediately like there's so much more. Um, so I had like contact with certain beings that really seemed autonomous in like what felt like a different universe, but beyond space and time type of thing. It was just love, and it was love and understanding. It was just so beautiful, and it removed my fear of death. It made me think about language and like space a lot. I was like, language is so silly, like it feels so constructed and limited. And then I was thinking about space, like space travel, like how stupid that was, like how like I thought that was everything. That was like the big picture stuff, but I was like, no, that's miniature stuff. Like that's nothing compared to all the other all other reality that's out there. So the way it impacted my religious worldview, to go back to your question, is that it completely broke open my materialist paradigm of like this matter is all there is, like so much more. But
Hmm.
it didn't make me a Christian right away or make me part of any religion, because this time it was just very open, and I was kind of like, I can take a bit of Buddhism and then take a bit of my Zen and just make a little mix of that. And only years after that, like a year, well, let's say 2 years after that, I I became ready to like say I'm a Christian, and that was mostly through um, actually Peterson and Vervaeke as well. Um, and Vervaeke is not a Christian, but he made me aware of the importance of like binding yourself to a tradition and like engaging in the rituals so that you can get to a deeper knowing. Um, Whereas if you simply take a bit of everything, you're not really anything, if you know what I mean. Like it takes binding to something to really experience what it means to be truly religious in the participation type of sense. Um, so yeah, and it affected me in the best possible way. I was very lucky to be well surrounded, because I know some people, they have an experience like this and they come back to the world and they're like, well, this is not very important. And
Hmm.
like, it it gives you kind of a license to abandon parts of your life. But with me, it did the opposite. Like it made me want to make my life like that reality was. It made me like appreciate my embodied existence as well. Like I didn't come out of that being like, oh, I'm ready to die and I'm gonna walk out of here. It made me realize I don't need to be afraid of death, but it's not my time yet. And there's beautiful things to do. And it made me infinitely more loving as a person. Like my relationship with my family got so much better. And just telling people I love them that I love, like I never did that, but I just did that all the time. And first, my siblings, I have 5 siblings, like they weren't really buying it. And then after a while, they start to realize like it's actually becoming part of your character and it's not just a little 2 week thing you're into. Um, but I will say one more thing about the experience is that I, so I told you like I wanted to go home that evening. It was because it was so overwhelming that when I got down from it, I got really scared, like horrified, scared, because I felt like I was stuck in this in between space. And it was the most anxiety ridden place I ever went to. And I told myself like you're never to do this again, but it was worth it. I felt like it was worth it, but I came down from it being extremely confused. Like I couldn't speak for 2 hours, and I would check this apple, like they gave us food and stuff, and I would check if it was actually real. Um,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, it blows your reality away if you. I think if you like take such a high dose of everything, and but it definitely did for me. But it was at the same time a bit of an odd experience because I felt uncomfortable kind of in the space where I got back to. And all the people that did it, like there was a group of, I don't know, 10 people, all of them had like serious issues. Like they came to solve issues that therapists couldn't solve. And they were all like 30 plus years old. And I was just there being like, yeah, I'm curious. I want to be a better
Just
person.
checking it
I was
out.
like
Yeah.
18, like what am I doing
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of double in that sense, but Yeah, that's what it did for me. And I'm still almost every day I think about it because I'm still learning from the experience, how it impacts my worldview and how I should relate to it, let's say. Because for a while there I just like absolutized it, like this is the peak. This is what I should get to. And I told you like I didn't want to do it again, but even shortly after, like 2 months after, I was like, no, but I don't want to do it again. And you start to like get curious again. Now I'm
Uh,
no longer in that space, but yeah.
that's there's a couple things. There's like five things that are interesting to me about what you just said. The last, I'll start with four. Um, but it's interesting how I can't imagine what the experience would have done to me when I was 18. I like I was such a different person by the time that I had mushrooms, which is interesting. So we got ayahuasca, LSD.
Holy Trinity.
Yeah, who knows?
Straight
So
to heresy.
there's I'm trying to recall my questions from what you were talking about. There was, you talked about saying I love you to your siblings and stuff like that more and more often. And I feel like for me, there was this, there's this feminine association with nature, right? And when people, and I feel like perhaps, I think this is ayahuasca. LSD, I guess, is like perhaps more synthetic, but I think it's this, roughly the same things are happening from a neural circuitry perspective. For me, I felt like there was like a reintegration of emotion coming out of it, a reintegration of love, a reintegration of like learning that, like feelings come from the body, right? And I feel like I was permanently changed afterwards to have much more attention to my intuition and my feelings and sort of like in some ways like an integration of the feminine that I'd neglected. Um, and that manifested in me, yeah, like being a lot more comfortable, like telling people that I loved them, telling my bros that I loved them, like that sort of thing. My experience was I had two different like significant experiences. So I'd done like a couple like micro doses, kind of like dip my toes in the water, trying to figure out what was going on. I think I'd probably like smoked weed for a couple years before this, and I was like coming out of, again, like I said earlier, kind of like a darker time in life. I was um reading and writing and trying to sort through like, okay, well, I'm noticing everyone around me is anxious and depressed, and I too am anxious and depressed, and like, what the hell is up with that? Like it wasn't always that way for me in my life, and it wasn't always that way for the people around me. Um, and so I was out of the country and I did mushrooms twice. The first time was very similar to the experiences that you guys are talking about. So I was like immersed in love, like bathed in this experience that I never felt before. And it was, um, I felt like I was in tune with the source. I remember that word coming up a lot and being like, okay, this is real. There are things that are real. It shattered my materialist worldview. Um, and it made me think that like this all matters. What you do matters. Um, the second experience I had was the first was I won't just similar to what you guys laid out. The second was the opposite. So I had an experience of like love, joy, peace wash over me. And then I had an experience of just like complete and total hell, essentially. And it like rattled me to my core but it was like equally useful in a way, because it was like, oh, that's real too. You know, like the suffering that people experience, that I experience, it was real, and it made me think like, okay, these are things that we have to deal with and navigate in this life. What else would I want to touch on about it? It's so funny. I talk about these things so often, and it's so easy for me to talk about. And then now it doesn't feel that way because I'm self-conscious, it seems. Um,
Can I ask you a question?
yes.
Did it, well, maybe, I guess I don't know your general disposition about this exactly, but psychedelics and Christianity aren't exactly,
Mhm.
um, they don't exactly fit together. Did it change how you felt about any of that, or like religion in general, maybe this having this structure, this tradition that, and then there's this experience that's so outside of it. Did it
This is
do anything for you in that way?
that's a great question, because it is putting me back on the right track. So before I did psychedelics, before I did mushrooms the first time, I went through the entire Genesis series. And part of what I was actually trying to do with the mushrooms was the Abrahamic stories impacted me a lot. And one of the main things was like, go up and out from your father's house into the land of the unknown. Right. That was one of the main things that really stuck with me, of like, okay, like, don't stay put, go up and out. And that's where God will develop you. You know, he won't develop you in your father's tent, so to speak, which I moved out when I was like 17, but I was, in my cultural father's tent, and so I moved abroad. And the second thing that I was reflecting on a lot before that too was Jacob wrestling with God. And that is a really like psychedelic, like, in the account in Genesis feels psychedelic, sort of. And for me, that's what I was actually trying to do. I felt like, okay, I like prayed over it before. I kind of was like, there had been a number of things that had made me think like, I feel like I'm not aligned properly spiritually, but I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it. And so I prayed over it, and I was like, God, like, I believe in a God that like responds well. When Jacob is wrestling with God, he like grabs him and he's like, bless me. He's like, kind of got him pinned, and he's like, bless me. And so And so there was some element of that felt like, it felt risky. It felt dangerous. I was like, I'm not sure, like, am I doing something I'm not supposed to? I don't know. But I like held on to the fact that like, if the God that I've read about in the Bible is accurately depicted, then I think he's the type of God that rewards the person who's like, all right, I'm taking a leap, I'm jumping, like I'm jumping out there. I told a friend after doing mushrooms that I wouldn't recommend them if you don't have peace about the idea that I said I wouldn't recommend doing mushrooms if you don't feel like you can walk in the realm where angels and demons roam and feel like you're in there with the good guys. So if you're like not so sure about that, if you're like not so sure if you're going to be headed in there with the good guys, like, I might take it easy essentially. So all of that for me was it had this like explicit, like, I had been having the beginnings of that re-enchantment from a Christian perspective, sort of. And it was like, okay, well, like, I'm going to take a leap and like ask you to show up, essentially. And it was so fascinating, the response that I got, right? Because the first one was this love, bliss, peace, just like, wow, like, we can do anything. We can make the world so great, like wouldn't it be so lovely if we could like bring this image of heaven on earth into to fruition and then yeah, the fact that I think it was it was wise of God in my judgment, but like the fact that the second response I got was the opposite. It tempered me, like in it that balance. I needed that balance. I think I think I can have like you're talking about Jordan Peterson having like, he's manic in his temperament. I'm that way too, I think. I think I'm like what you used to, from a clinical perspective, they would call it like manic depressive, right? You see this in Kanye. Thankfully, and perhaps, maybe I'd be a wealthy star if I was as manic depressive as Kanye, who knows? But I would say also thankfully, like, it's a bit less that way, but yeah, I can relate to that, and so that having that balance was good for me from those experiences, I think. Um, is there anything else I want to touch on here? Let me think for 9 seconds, and I'll cut it out in the edit if I need to.
Actually, we talked about that experience. I remember back at the time, maybe or after you had that
Soon
experience.
after, very soon after, I
Yeah.
think, like a month after, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and it was funny because I'd had the same experience. Um, Not with the mushrooms, but again, somebody had given me like a bag of little acid tabs, and so I was like, well, we can just have that good feeling again whenever we want, right? And it didn't work that way. Um, I was like chasing that peak experience, and the next time I did it, it was awful. It was so hellish and terrible that I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. I think I did a little bit of mushrooms maybe a few years later, like significantly less. I was like, I don't need this in my life all the time. But it was, like you said, wise. It was like a kick in the ass, like, hey, you don't, this is not what it's about. You
Right.
don't need
This
to
is
just
just a
be,
painting for you. It's just, this isn't reality.
yeah,
This is just something for you to observe. Yeah.
right. This is like a teaching moment, and now you move on. You don't,
Hmm.
this isn't going to become how you're going to live your life or something like that. So, um, I don't know what else to say about that except for that it was very valuable. And I think it's interesting that it happened to both of us, and I wonder how many other people have that experience, if it works or not. Because some people it doesn't seem to work on, they keep going. I know a few people
Hmm.
who did that, but if you do get the little kick, like, hey, that's enough.
How
It's
are they, the people who continue to go on? Does it seem to generally not work out well?
I think some people are really open, the people that I was around, particularly, I'm thinking of a couple, like two people in particular, and I think it explodes your brain. I think it's really bad for you to overdo psychedelics,
Hmm.
especially maybe as a young person who's adrift, which is usually what it is, right? I mean, you're not grounded and you're like, this is cool. And I'm gonna just keep having cool experiences and I can just do that. And then you think you're gifted with some kind of secret knowledge. You're initiated somehow because you've had this experience, but you're not. You're like really inflated because that's what happens. It's like the natural response. And then when you don't come back down, you just have this drug fueled. I don't know. I think it's probably usually pretty unhealthy for people. So the people I know, we're not in contact anymore, but they're not doing well the last time. And I think that's probably pretty common from what I've
Hmm.
heard.
Hmm.
I had like after I had the experience, I kept getting these dreams about that place that I went to. So the physical place, like with all the people. And all the dreams were like warnings, like don't go back, you know? Like
Wow.
one of them was on an
Hmm.
island and they were like drinking and they were taking the psychedelics and they were like, we're saving the world and this and that, but they were just on their island, getting high the whole time. And
Wow.
yeah, I think your dreams really like try to tell you these types of things, and I couldn't because I was like flirting with the idea of going back, but I had like I think dozens of these types of dreams where they were just like warnings. Because when I left them, I told them, I'm not gonna do it again, and they were all like, "No, why?" you know. And I think that that planted the seed of these dreams of like, you know, this is a tool. It can afford an experience. It is not the experience itself. Don't absolutize the substance, um, and don't abuse it. There's a reason they call it medicine. So in ancient
Mm.
cultures, where you don't give medicine to a healthy person all the time. Once the instability has been stabilized, it's okay. You can just live your life, and you don't need to go out into the chaos all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I felt like I needed to. I knew when I had after the first two that I had that it was like, okay, that's my dose for a long time. And that it's been a while now. It's maybe like maybe 3 years or so it seems. But yeah, and there hasn't been a strong um I always thought that I would do it again, and I think I probably will,
Mhm.
but but it's not like, I've certainly haven't been in a rush, you know what I mean? And I know it's not like here's a guaranteed good time, you know? Like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
but I do think that it's possible that, if I feel that I need um like a spark again, a
Yeah.
spiritual spark, that it might be something that would be useful for that, because it was for me the first time. I'd be interested to maybe I spent both of those experiences just like writing, and that for me is the bringing of chaos, the medium of bringing chaos into order that suits my disposition nowadays, I think. Um, and it'd be interesting to reflect on some of that writing, but it would take too long for me to pull it up now. So, well, I could pull it up quick, but it would take too long for us to go over. And I'd like to think we're about close to wrapping up here. Let me figure out what our last. Emilee, we should go over your art another time. Reflections on your guys' previous podcast. I think I'm going to skip this because everybody listening, you should go listen to the conversation you guys had was great. Why do you think so this conversation you guys had popped? So I guess we are going to talk about reflections on it. It seems like it popped a bit on your feed, and so I'm still working part-time producing a show, and it's always interesting to me. I almost on the show I work on, I almost always know when something's going to rip. And this,
Mm.
we've just put out something yesterday and it got like 150,000 views in 2 days or whatever. And I knew when we recorded, I was like, this thing's gonna rip. The conversation you guys had seems to have performed disproportionately well on your channel as well in the past week or so.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is? Either of you?
Well, I'll start, I guess. The main reason I think is that, you can have a good piece of content, but if it's not like if it doesn't look nice in terms of the thumbnail and the title and stuff like that, people are usually not going to see it. So if you like, I have a friend of mine, I've had him on a couple times. He's this anonymous guy from, well, I shouldn't say where he's from, but
There you
he's
go.
like he's excellent. Like he does these philosophy videos. They're like hours long, so in depth, so excellent. But people just don't find him because it's like it's hard to watch 4 hours of that, and it's not specifically marketed. Um, I think if you make it semi-attractive in terms of the title and the thumbnail, and then if the content is actually interesting, that's usually the main two components for something doing well. And I think Emilee's story and the art aspect of it and some of the like magical subjects that we both are interested in. I think they're attractive to people. Whereas I know usually also like I usually have an intuition about if a thing is gonna have a lot of views or not. And to me, that's not very important because it's not the goal of my podcast. But I think this
What
is
is the goal?
the goal is high quality conversation and letting people that want to be heard. Or in Emilee's case, Emilee didn't reach out to me. I reached out to her because I thought people would want to hear. And I also thought like this will be a super interesting person to talk with.
Why do you
Um,
think
like
people wanted to hear what she has to say? Because I think both of us, your art just makes sense to me. It has for a while. And I knew when I talked with you, Lucas, I was, obviously I brought you up, Emilee, in the conversation because I was like, I could feel that it would suit you. But so why do you think what she has to say, why'd you know what she had to say would resonate? And what was it specifically about the art when you looked at it that made it feel like it made sense to you?
actually, let's start with the art. Actually, of this question, I thought the art was like undeniably beautiful, but also kind of psychedelic, to be honest, which I really love. Like it seemed more chaotic than what I was used to, but it also connected to this tradition. It kind of felt like a visual representation of what Peterson did with the Bible, you know,
Mhm.
whereas like he makes it more alive and like uh
Hmm. That's interesting.
represents the depth of it actually. So that's what the art did to me. That was really exciting. And then I've just well, I'll speak personally why I think Emilee's interesting is that she is an artist and that makes her way of thinking much more unique and also less verbal. I picked up on the fact that you said that you think visually, Emilee. I have the same, and I've not found anyone that has that as well. For me, it's like predominantly images as well, and
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's really interesting because it pulls you out of the usual verbal patterns that a lot of us are in. Like right now, I'm in this stage with my podcast where I've spoken to a lot of like this little corner people, and we've kind of ended up in the same type of spot. Like a lot of us turn to Christianity and a similar story and a similar lingo. And I think one of the reasons that Emilee was interesting to my audience and beyond, so people from the outside, is that she has a different perspective. So it that can afford insight, when someone thinks a bit differently. Um, and yeah, just the artistic fact I think is also super cool. And I generally don't have a lot of women on, and I think women often are more intuitive than men, which is, I mean, it's kind of an obvious statement, but it sometimes can get really dorky when you're just speaking to a bunch of dudes, like
Sure,
so
sure.
propositional and like brainy. And that's not the same for all people because I think I'm more feminine myself, but generally speaking, um, yeah, that's what I would say.
I guess to
Thank you,
serve
Lucas.
it, yeah, that is.
Thanks for that.
Mhm, mhm.
Guys making me blush.
Why? So this is, I'm sure it'll be a weird question for you to answer, but why do you think what you're doing resonates so deeply? Because I think for me that's what it was. It was a depth of the imagery to where it was like, oh, this art is different than other art. Yeah. Why do you think it resonates the way it does?
I don't know. I have
Hmm.
no idea. I'm making it because it's what I need to make, and the fact that anybody wants to look at it at all is like shocking and amazing. I don't know. I think it's very emotional to me, and maybe that's part of it. I'm not sure. It's like it's really um I don't want to be disparaging in the way I say this, but I know people who got really into like they draw fish and that's all that they draw. They would like specialize in fish or medieval armor and that was like their thing. And um I just don't know how much you could feel about fish or like medieval armor, but for me, this is coming from like a problem or a tension or a this is something I think the things I'm drawing and working on, it's something I think about all the time. This is like my entire um, world is wrapped up in what I'm doing. So I'm trying to put that into it, and maybe that has something to do with it. That
Mhm.
it's coming from something really fundamental to me.
Mhm.
And I can only suppose that's it because people seem to really sp respond to the Jonah picture in particular. And when I made that, I was having such a bad time. I was having the worst time. And that seems to be what other people, they're like, I like that one. And I'm like, really? Because that's not, I mean, I've worked so hard on all these other things, but I think it's almost like the feeling came through or something. I don't know. I'm not really
Is
sure.
there in that image the as Jonah's falling into the whale, I remember his like arms, there's sort of this like that it seems like there's a like body language of like acceptance of like a willful entering in the whale. Was that intentional? Like, is that how
Yeah, I
you?
mean, he does ask to be chucked over the side of the boat. And I
Mhm.
remember at the time thinking this was kind of this was after I'd had this psychedelic experience that I mentioned, and I remember writing something like all the time, kind of the same things like I have to let go, I have to let go, I have to let go. I need to surrender. I'm going down. Like this is definitely like a downward movement. And
Mhm.
resisting, it was like resisting is like it's not gonna work. It's just inevitable. So it's kind of like, sometimes you have to go with something because resisting is just it's worse,
Mhm.
even if it's really bad. So Um, yeah, so there's, I think the idea of surrender, I think is pretty crucial.
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Indeed.
actually read Jonah after the podcast I did with Emilee. Like I hadn't read it in so long, and I didn't realize that he voluntarily went off the boat. You know, which,
Mhm.
like as you're pointing out right now, that's essential. He's surrendering, he's letting go, and yeah, he's willfully doing that, which I thought was cool, reflecting truth.
I think a lot about I think a lot about the story of Jonah with I feel like for a while I've felt this calling, so to speak, that I never had peace not going after. And I feel like instead of thinking that I was running from it, I just was like, I just can't bear it now. I'm going to do it later. I'm going to do it later. And, and then I did that, for a while, for maybe, 2, 3 years. And, I realized that I thought a lot about sacrifice before I moved to Bali the first time, before I did psychedelics the first time. Nowadays, I've been thinking a lot about, okay, like what sacrifices are necessary for me to fall into my calling, and like if this is my calling, if this is the thing that God is asking of me, then the list of what I'm willing to sacrifice should be pretty comprehensive, should be just about everything, you know. Um, so I think that this is a pretty good place to wrap it up. There's so many tangents that we could go down and things we could run down. I'd love to have at least maybe one or two more conversations, hopefully many, but with the three of us where we can say, okay, we're gonna do deep dive on these four paintings, deep dive on perhaps some things that you've been discussing, Lucas, or deep dive on some writing. I'd love to take some of my writing and put it in front of you guys. And we talked about this, Lucas, about how um so much of my feeling or so much of my writing is like really feeling based. And I would love, it's nice to hear when people are like, oh, I love it, but I would love to hear like when you're like, I don't think that's right. I think that's a little bit off, because a lot of times on my X too, I'll post something and then I'll think about it for like 3 months and I'll repost the same exact phrase but slightly altered, and then I'll retweet that one and then put the new one on top of it so people can see like, all right, 3 months ago I thought it was this and now I think it's like this, and I
Nice.
changed 3 words, and so I'd love to get your guys' brains on that as well, just to be like, I think it's a little bit off and here's why.
Cool. Yeah. And hearts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the future we'll get that going. I'm really grateful for you guys taking the time today. Thank you for, I mean, you guys know how it is, but bearing with me, I'm like, it's so funny because I've been doing these sorts of things for so long, but I've been in the entertainment, whatever video space for so long, and then I get up here and it's just like, Lucas, I admire I think you crush it, and I'm sure doing like 50, 60 episodes is you've learned a lot along the way. And
I'm
one
just
thing I wanted to,
underprepared. That's what I do. I just go in unprepared, and it's like because
there may
then
be
I have
wisdom
nothing
to
to
that.
fall
Yeah.
back on. Huh?
Right. I last thing I'll say is that I noticed watching some of your stuff that you're an excellent listener, which I admire, and you're an excellent encourager as well. At the yeah, you do a great job of that, and I can tell it like
Thanks, man.
it people receive it when you say things to them. I think people feel seen, and they you can see them light up when you do that. And so I think it's awesome.
Thank
And
you. I only say
Emilee,
it when I think it's true. So
yeah, well,
you
that's
know,
why it probably
It's
is true.
working. Yeah.
Yeah. And Emilee, you're cool. All right, I'm gonna stop long-winded outroing this, but appreciate you guys. Thank you. We'll talk
Thank you,
soon.
Jake.
thank you, Jake.
Cool.
Thank you so much.